Okay, good morning and welcome to our first class of our new book here, second book on Tantra, and leading into sort of the final presentation, at least this sort of cycle of teachings I'll give, where we'll go into Naram Chenmo and teach a tiny bit, just a brief introduction to Kriya Tantra. So before we get started with the prayers, and we'll have a very short meditation, as always, I'm having to shorten the meditations a little bit now, only because I just feel that we have just so much, not a lot of time and just so much content to present. So I always want to make sure that I have that. And of course, with this course, again, I'll have some question and answer classes where we can have a bit of discussion. But the book that we're looking at here is, I think, I'm not too sure if this is the newest version of it, but anyway, it's from, hang on, I'm just going to admit Aaron in here. The Psychology of Buddhist Tantra by Rob Preece. So, of course, here's the book if everyone has it or does not have it. And of course, you can get it from Amazon. The older version of it, I think, was called The Alchemical Buddha, if I remember from the old Snow Lion newspaper days. And it was really funny because it had Mahakala's face on the cover, if I remember correctly. But Zaza Rinpoche, our guru, he taught with Rob Preece at his place in Wales years ago, for instance. Rob Preece, I have so much respect for. He was a student of Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe's back in the 70s and so forth. I believe he's elderly now, but still teaching from what I know. From what I can see, there's not enough of him on YouTube intensive. Maybe you can access videos from him somewhere else, but it's a bit of a shame because I just think his work should be promoted because it's so good. I like it. And of course, he's a trained a Jungian psychotherapist. So this was one of the first books that I read that had a really good Western psychological background for an understanding of Buddhism. Oftentimes, just from my philosophy background, we always said when you compare things as a way of introducing them, you have to be very careful that you know what you're talking about. So, in other words, if I don't know a lot about quantum mechanics and I don't know a lot about Plato, but then I write a book showing Plato and quantum mechanics work together, what you end up getting isn't something that's a good introduction, but basically a mishmash of gobbledygook. And so when people say, oh, I'm going to mix Jung and Tantra, I think it's better nowadays, but in the old days, you'd kind of be like, "Oh, I don't think this is gonna work," because of course, let's say in the old days, people didn't really understand or have access to a lot of the teachings on Buddhist Tantra, so they didn't know as much. And then I guess it just depends how much study and qualification you got, let's say in Jungian psychotherapy, to make it worth your while or a good quality text. So Ron Priest has, because he's such an old-time practitioner, he's got such a good experiential basis in Buddhist Tantra and Tibetan Buddhism, and of course his study of Jung, you can see is very, very good. There's all sorts of people more and more. I know Mark Epstein was a guy that did a lot on psychotherapy and Buddhism. I've read a few of his books, very good. He did one on desire, which I really, really like. But this is a fertile, if it's the kind of thing people were interested in, it's a very, very fertile sort of horizon of work that you could look at where you could really show the meeting place between Western psychotherapy and psychoanalytic models and Buddhist Tantra. They're not the same thing, obviously. And I think it'd be a mistake to say that they are, but I'm just saying you can help showing the things together. It can be sort of a helpful, I guess, introduction or help with things. So Rob Priest has written another number of books, and I just picked this one because he's written a number of new books on Buddhist Tantra over the last, let's say, 10 years, that we could have used those. But this is an old favorite. I just have to sort of rely on just my prejudice here that this is one of my favorite books on Buddhist Tantra as an introduction. And so I'd like to use that one. But of course, I would point the way to people reading his other books. He has one on Noondro that's really, really good. He's done one on sort of Tantra in the West or whatever. It's got green Tara on the cover. Then he's done ones for even specific Buddhas. Like I saw one in the bookstore the other day just on Vajrapani Buddha of Power. He's got an introduction to that. He might have one on Avalokiteshvara, let's say. There's one on sort of steps of mixing compassion, I think, with Tantra. It's sort of a red book with a heart. Anyway, what's good is there's also PDF or sort of digital copies of these if you can't get the hard copy of the book or whatever else. He's got one which is sort of a very good book just on the whole Jungian path, but in terms of Tibetan Buddhism in a lot of ways called Wisdom of Imperfection, which is good. And the one I don't have it on me right now, it's in the bookcase outside here. But there's one on bodhicitta, and I think it's called The Courage to Feel. And that's a fabulous book just on generating compassion, how to do it, sort of the pitfalls, issues you're dealing with when you're sort of embarking on that journey. And I think that's a very, very good book as well. So anyway, let's get started with this. And just like the Lama Yeshe book, we will skip the end of it on Highest Yoga Tantra. I suggest that you read that on your own, especially I see, my friends here, a lot of them have a background in that. But in terms of sort of presenting this online on YouTube and everything else, I don't feel comfortable talking about that stuff. I'll let the lamas talk about that. And so, it's basically our study will go to, about page 160 or so. There's a small introduction to Action Tantra, Kriya Tantra, and he says healing through peaceful practices. And at the very end, there's one on creative transformation, and we call and the mandala. He actually has a book on the Jungian path and Tibetan Buddhist mandalas. That's very, very good too, that I would recommend. So maybe once you've read this book, you could download or whatever his book on mandalas and look at that. Okay, with that, with further ado here, let's get started with a few prayers. So to start with the Heart Sutra. Homage, perfection, wisdom, the Blessed Mother. Thus I have heard, at one time the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajgir in Manas Vulture's Mountain, to the great assembly of monks and nuns and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. That time the Blessed One was absorbed in the concentration of countless aspects of phenomena called profound illumination. That time also Spirit of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva, the great being, was looking perfectly at the practice of profound perfection of wisdom, looking perfectly also at the five aggregates being empty of inherent existence. Then through the power of Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva, the great being, how should a son of the lineage train who wishes to engage in the practice of profound perfection wisdom? Thus he spoke, and Spirit of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva, the great being, replied to Venerable Shariputra as follows. Shariputra, whatever son or daughter of the lineage wishes to engage in the practice of profound perfection wisdom should look perfectly like this. Subsequently, looking perfectly and correctly also the five aggregates being empty of inherent existence. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is none other than form, form is none other than emptiness. Likewise, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, these all phenomena are emptiness, having no characteristics. They are not produced and do not cease. They have no defilement, no separation from defilement. They have no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, and no consciousness. There are no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mentality, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no tactile object, no phenomenon. There is no I element and so forth, up to no mentality element, and also up to no element of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance, and no exhaustion of ignorance, and so forth, up to no aging and death, no exhaustion of aging and death. Likewise, there's no suffering, origin, cessation, or path, no exalted awareness, no attainment, also no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because there's no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Their minds have no obstructions and no fear. Passing utterly beyond perversity, they attain the final nirvana. Also, all Buddhas reside perfectly in the three times, having relied upon the perfection of wisdom, became manifest complete Buddhas in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the equal to the unequaled mantra, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, since it's not false, should be known as the truth. The mantra of perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Tayata Om Gata Gata Paragata Parasamgati Bodhisoha. Shariputra Bodhisattva, great beings should train the profound perfection of wisdom like this. Then the Blessed One arose in that concentration, said to Spirit of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, that he'd spoken well. Good, good, O son of lineage, it is like that. Since it's like that, just as you have revealed in that way, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced, and the Tathagata will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra, Spirit of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, and the entire circle of disciples, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, demigods, and spirits, were delighted and highly praised what had been spoken by the Blessed One. Okay, so let's just take a moment to do our meditation here. Be the same one as we did with our The last Tantra course, just focusing on Vajradhara. So again, we're sort of seated in a wide open space, ground like beautiful lapis lazuli, wide dome of a blue sky above us, and ourselves surrounded by all sentient beings. So our mother on our left, father on our right, people we love the most behind us as support, and people we like the least or have issues with in front of us as objects of our prayers and compassion. And going up from there, people from all over the world. You can think of places that need our prayer and healing more than other places. The whole sort of animal or natural world here, the all different sentient beings from that space. The spirit world as well. Gods and demigods are sort of like the celestial beings. And then countless beings in lower states of rebirth, hungry ghost beings and hell beings. And we can feel that we're all here together meditating sort of peacefully. So in the sky above us here, just in front of us, made out of beautiful blue light, sapphire blue light, just like a big blue diamond or a piece of lapis, is Conqueror Vajradhara, Buddhist Shakyamuni's Sambhogakaya form. So we just have him, you can put him on a throne and lotus seat if you want, otherwise just sort of floating in space. So he's in lotus position there with his arms crossed. Left hand holds a bell and right hand a dorje or vajra, thunderbolt scepter. And he has a crown on, beautiful jewelry and ornaments and silk robes and so forth. And at his heart, just on a sundus, we can visualize beautiful hum letter, H-U-M, or in the Tibetan or Sanskrit, blue, softly radiating out the colors of the five elements. So white, blue, green, red, and yellow. So just taking refuge in generating bodhicitta here, I and all sentient beings until we achieve enlightenment, go for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And through the virtues we collect by giving other perfections, may we become a Buddha for the benefit of all. So from our hearts, sort of turning to refuge, generating refuge in the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. But in particular, the Dharma jewel being the wisdom realizing emptiness, the main thing that we're sort of taking refuge in. And Buddha would be sort of the embodiment, sort of like the realization of this object of emptiness. And also our Buddha nature, that our mind is empty, sort of our being is empty. And we will realize this one day or reveal it. And the Arya Sangha, all the sentient beings who sort of graduated this path, who have realized emptiness to become Arya beings. This is like our true community, our true sort of classmates, so to speak, or peers. So taking refuge in them. And now generating bodhicitta, just really having as our intention here, just that all sentient beings reach full awakening, that may we become a Buddha to lead all sentient beings to become Buddhas as well. So everything we're doing, just with studying here together, everything we do throughout the day may be put towards that goal. So generating love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. May everyone be happy. May everyone be free from misery. May no one ever be separated from their happiness. May everyone have equanimity, free from hatred and attachment. And just before we meditate here, the 7 limbs, just making our practice Buddhist, we can just think of prostration limb, showing honor and respect to the sacred here, the 3 jewels. Offering, opening our hearts in generosity and gratitude. Confession and rejoicing. So again, just calling ourselves or letting ourselves be called out by others and the Buddhas here for our many imperfections. And just being accountable and just sort of saying that we will work on these and again, let go of all of them, purify them, become better, rejoicing in all the goodness in the world and ourselves and others. Again, asking all the Buddhistic and light beings to constantly stay with us and to constantly teach us and guide us. And again, dedication, just like our bodhicitta, dedicating everything we do for the enlightenment of all sentient beings. Okay, I'm going to read the short Lam Rim prayer because it's important just to unify our mind with sort of the three principal paths, just a renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness before we meditate on Tantra here and study Tantra. So the path begins, we're strong with reliance on my kind teacher, source of all good. Oh, blessed be this understanding to follow him with great devotion. This human life with all its freedoms, extremely rare with so much meaning. Oh, blessed be this understanding all day and night to seize its essence. My body, like a water bubble, decays and dies so very quickly. After death comes results of karma, just like the shadow of a body. With this firm knowledge and remembrance, bless me to be extremely cautious, always avoiding harmful actions and gathering abundant virtue. Samsara's pleasures are deceptive, get no contentment, only torment. So please bless me to strive sincerely to gain the bliss of perfect freedom. Oh, bless me so that from this pure thought come mindfulness and greatest caution, to keep as my essential practice the doctrine's root, the pratimoksha. Just like myself, all my kind mothers are drowning in samsara's ocean. Also, that I may soon release them, bless me to train in bodhicitta. But I cannot become a Buddha by this alone without the three ethics, so bless me the strength to practice the Bodhisattva's ordination. By pacifying my distractions and analyzing perfect meanings, bless me to quickly gain the union of special insight and quiescence. When I become a pure container through common paths, bless me to enter the essence practice of good fortune, the supreme vehicle Vajrayana. The two attainments both depend on my sacred vows and my commitments. Bless me to understand this clearly and keep them at the cost of my life. By constant practice in 4 sessions, the way explained by holy teachers, oh, bless me to gain both the stages which are the essence of the Tantras. May those who guide me on the good path and my companions all of long lives, bless me to pacify completely all obstacles, outer and inner. May I always find perfect teachers and take delight in holy Dharma, accomplish all grounds and pass swiftly, and gain the state of Vajradhara. Okay, with this, we can just sort of ask for the blessings of body, speech, and mind, just from our heart here of Conquer Vajradhara. And just feel at this point that he starts to sort of melt into light and sort of shrink. A beautiful ball of blue light or energy. Just like a twinkling star in the sky here. And he's small, but sort of a piece of corn or a sunflower seed. So he comes down to the crown of our head, sort of turns around, the same direction we're sitting here. And then slowly descends, enters our crown chakra. It's made out of pure light or energy, so we can do this. And just very slowly descends just in front of our spine here in the central channel. Through our crown chakra, down to our throat chakra, and to our heart. So once he descends into our heart here, just feel that he dissolves. And again, just you've got a big bowl of water and you drop a little drop of blue food coloring in and just sort of dissolves and becomes one with the water. Same thing, Vajradhara's mind and our mind become one. Just feel that all the wisdom, compassion, and power become one with us. And our clear light mind and his clear light mind again are one. So just feel, just meditate here just a bit for a few minutes. Great sort of joy and bliss and spaciousness here. And I always say like luminosity, sort of a awake, clear, aware mind. Okay, so just coming out of meditation here. And just a little short meditation today as I'm just looking at the time. We've got only about half an hour left. Okay, so good. Here we go with her book. And I'm not too sure just before I start, just with going over my notes here. Has anyone read this book or uh started it? Do people, yeah, do you like it? Thumbs up? Yeah, you do. Okay, good. Okay, well, good. I'm glad. There you go. So a little bit of feedback there. It's yeah, it's very well written, and I think all the stuff's just like that. It's very, very good. Okay, so I just wanted to talk today. I just prepared a lot of notes. I realized too much notes. So next week at this time, we'll go over. I just wanted to look at just an introductory chapter and make a few remarks. And then next week, the class will be on the origins of Tantra. And when I look at that, sort of my notes for that, I realize, oh, there's some good stuff to talk about there. So we'll leave that till next time. I just wanted to make sort of preliminary remarks just on the introduction to the book that Rob Preece writes. So I'll just read some of my notes here and give a little bit of comment, and then we can have a bit of question and answers there. So he starts by saying, when we enter into Tantra, we need to loosen our preconceptions about the nature of reality, to inhabit a twilight world where distinctions between the material and the symbolic are less defined or more together. One thing I will say is that reading this book now in 2025 is very different than having read it back in the 1990s when I did. And I think it's just the world's so different now. I mean, yeah, the world, yes, state the obvious, the world's so different now. But I think even on a cultural level, we're so different now. We're just a lot more accepting of sort of spirituality and the symbolic, the mythical, poetic. And over the last few years, there was a huge renaissance even of magic in the Western tradition. A few years ago, a friend of mine sent me this whole renaissance of magic among teenagers on TikTok. It was a great article. It was really, really funny to read. And so I think people's minds are a lot more open to this. So I think in the when Rob Preece wrote this, I think you know maybe the 1990s. I'm trying to think maybe well, this just says 2006 here, but you know, it was in the early 90s that he wrote it. I think he probably had to argue hard for these kinds of values. And I think now probably some of this will strike us as being painfully obvious. So I'm just saying that goes to show just the historical situation where it's a little bit different in studying Tantra. I think it's a good thing. But anyway, he says, yes, that the sort of tantric world is one where the material and the symbolic are the distinctions are less defined there. So he says, when we embark on this journey, we discover psyche and soma. Of course, those are the two Greek terms for the unconscious and matter in the Jungian system there. So the tantric view doesn't make solid differentiation between these two, between the unconscious and matter. There's two reflections of the same ultimate reality. So I remember my friend Cindy Rumi, who some of you might know in Buddhist community in Vancouver, her husband Dave was a Jungian psychotherapist, and I talked to him about Jung years ago at the Buddhist temple there in Vancouver. And he wrote a book on Jung and everything. But he recommended one of the best ways of starting on Jung is to read Jung's autobiography, right? And that's, I think, called Dreams, Reflections, and something else. And that's very, very good. And I'd recommend that because what he was able to do in a real tantric way in his autobiography, he weaves in his whole symbolic dream and sort of spiritual experiences within just the facts of his life. So him giving an account of himself, his own autobiography, it's like he's forwarding, thank you, Leslie, memories, dreams, and reflections. There you go. He is sort of forwarding the whole Jungian method in his very sort of autobiographical reflections. So it's an introduction just in reading his life story to the Jungian method. That's what I think is good, which goes to show that he really did live what he was, or sort of be what he sort of taught, or live his philosophy. It's a similar thing. I'm not arguing, but if you ever read any of Jacques Lacan's stuff, the way he taught his seminars and the way he acted in his personal life, it was his very philosophy. If you go on YouTube, there's a famous thing where he was giving a lecture, and this young Marxist activist jumps up and interrupts the lecture to kind of like stop the whole class, including Lacan always smoked cigars, taking his ashtray and throwing it in Lacan's face. But what's amazing is Jacques Lacan doesn't skip a beat. He brings that into the lecture itself, right? So it's like, it's kind of funny. And so he starts doing psychoanalysis on the activist as the guy's yelling at. Like it's quite something, actually. It goes to show that it was all like one thing for him, right? So it's the same thing with Jung. And so that's in his very philosophy, sort of the unconscious and matter. There isn't, this ambiguous distinction. And why I'm saying this is that there's a great line in the book where he said that he and Freud, of course, his student, his teacher, I should say, and of course Jung was his student, were having a meeting together and they were talking about psychic phenomena. And when they were talking, all of a sudden this poltergeist activity started happening. And so what Jung said is, see, the fact that we're thinking or talking about it, it's manifesting it in reality. And what he said, what was funny, of course, because Freud thought it was all nonsense, is he would refuse to admit that that was actually happening. Freud was just like, whatever, I'm not going to pay attention to all the poltergeist in the room here. But the point Jung was making, even in his book, is that you can't sort of draw a distinction again between the unconscious and sort of your life or sort of the experiential events around you, that they go together. So it's a similar thing in Tantra, and that's what Rob Preece is saying here. So in the West, we make a clear distinction between spirit and matter, whereas in the Eastern traditions, these are not separated. Tantra or Vajrayana emerged out of an animistic culture, civilization, where the spirit world was sort of intermeshed within that culture. In the modern Western culture that we're in right now, we overlook this animism and see it as sort of a form of superstition or primitive folk belief, or what they call folk science when you do in philosophy. So in our more sort of Western or modern world, when we study Tantra, it's a Tantra that's more sanitized, where we just see it as sort of a set of ritual practices that are usually done sort of in the context of a particular temple or so forth, right? But this isn't the way that a Tantra was traditionally done, let's say in India, like 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. At that time, yogis and yoginis were found in charnel grounds or cemeteries, in the wilderness, in caves, where elemental energies were present, where spirits were present, just in their practice and in their lives. And it's hard to bridge this. Western people, when they approach Tantra, always want to break it down into psychological explanations or scientific explanations, which is what we do. So, of course, I think it's different if we're using the psychological explanations of Jung compared to other ones, like if you're using brain science or cognitive science. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't do that. One of my best friends is studied with that one teacher. He was at the Nalanda Institute there, Joe Lazaro or so. I can't remember. He taught in Toronto a bunch, and he has a background in brain science and also Tantra, and was trying to show a lot of the physiological things that Tantra or even Qigong or Tai Chi do to your brain when you're doing. And I read some articles, and they were quite good. I'm not saying that they weren't good. It was kind of interesting. But generally, what Rob Preece is saying here is that there's an entire spiritual animistic or vitalist background that you traditionally have in Tantric cultures that was present in the West, in our traditional European cultures, but has been forgotten or replaced or sort of let go of. So it's a little bit harder to approach the teachings because of that absence. So what he says is Carl Jung can help make this bridge, can bridge this for us or be helpful in this regard. Okay. And what he says is that the big parallel here is that Jung's main psychological method is that of alchemy. And of course, a lot of his stuff was to show the traditional Hermetic traditions you get in the West, Renaissance traditions of spiritual alchemy, could be used in a psychological method for us personally in this sort of modern age. And when we look at it, this alchemical path, you can see a similar thing happening in Tibetan Buddhism. So this can deepen our understanding. Also, the Tantra can help on the other way. Like if Jung can help us understand Tantra, Tantra can help us, on the other hand, understand sort of a Jungian perspective by getting us in touch with archetypal psychology. And one of the things we'll see with this book is, of course, the idea of using deities as archetypes. Or, of course, they're technically not the same thing. I'm not going to say that tantric deities are Jungian archetypes. They're not. But it does help. Jungian archetypes can help us understand how deities work in a way that's sort of helpful. So we see that Tantra needs a fertile ground to grow. It relies less on intellectual and philosophical knowledge, but rather an innate trust in an intuitive and creative faculties of the mind. The language of Tantra is not the abstract intellectual concepts of philosophy or even of science, but rather the language of symbol and myth. The poetic metaphorical reality of Tantra takes the power of symbol as its most refined potential. And that's what you see. I don't have that now. Again, it's in my bookshelf. But a book I would really recommend is by Robert Beer. Some of you probably have them, which is he's one of the great Thangka artists or Tibetan Buddhist artists. Robert Beer's an old English guy. And he wrote a book just on tantric symbolism. So there's two of them. There's the big expensive one, which is a huge hardcover art book. It's actually at the temple here at the Gompa. Or you have a smaller paperback version of it, and you can look Robert Beers and Drinking a Beer. And I would recommend that because the entire book is just on tantric symbolism. That's because he wanted to show all the symbolism and all the artwork that he does. And it's such a good book because he shows the history behind the symbols, where they come from, usually traditional in sort of classical Indian tantric symbolism, but also Tibetan ones as well. And it gives you the background. But it also, what's interesting is in a Jungian way, these symbols are, of course, very cultural and old-fashioned from a particular older Indian civilization, let's say Tibetan culture, but there's also something very universal in the symbolism as well. That when you read it, you're like, oh, like I can see, Western culture has this or that, but it also just on a personal level affects you. So just everything, the symbolism, let's say certain kinds of implements or weapons or mudras that a deity does, or different kinds of spirit beings, they'll have like a cultural aspect, but then a symbolic aspect as well. So that book actually breaks everything down. I would really, really recommend that one. Okay, so Jung said, and I've just got a little bit more to go, and then we'll have a question and answer here. Jung said that in Eastern cultures, they reject the idea of fantasy, not because it's irrelevant or childish, but because they transformed its essence into their religions a long time ago. So this you could argue, and I'm not going to give you sort of a philosophical argument for it, but I think in the West we still have this idea, these distinctions between fantasy and reality, what's authentic, what's inauthentic, what's religion, what's secular, what's profane, what's sacred, these kinds of things. So we'll say in Western culture that a lot of stuff like dreams, symbolism, magic is fantasy compared to science and mathematics, which is reality. So if you're doing Tantra and my dear parents, peace be upon them, they accused me of this, like whatever, 30 years ago when I got into Tibetan Buddhism. They said, oh, Matthew, stop indulging in fantasy. You're a big fan of Tolkien when you were a little kid reading Lord of the Rings. Now, as a young adult, you're doing the same thing with Tibetan Buddhism. It's just you've just sort of continued your fantasy work into sort of a fantasy religion. And of course, over years, I sort of proved to them that wasn't the case. But in Western context, we still see a lot of this stuff as being sort of more fantasy. And when we say fantasy, it's something childish and ultimately not true. Whereas what Jung's saying is that sort of in traditional, more Eastern approaches, fantasy is understood on sort of a deeper level of the imagination. and again of archetypes and these sort of primordial symbols. And so not only is it helpful and true, but it actually might end up being more true on one level or more helpful, more relevant to people on an existential or spiritual level than things that in the West we say are true, like let's say science, mathematics, engineering, these kinds of things. So mystical truth and historical truth become interwoven in Tantra to express the inner meaning and symbolic nature of experience. An example would be yeah, so he says here, Tantra is a twilight zone where the outer material normal world and the inner world of the psyche merge into one reality. So you see this when you're studying also Tantra life stories of different famous Buddhist saints, is it's poetic, it's sort of fantastic and sort of factual at the same time when you have a Namtar. And so if one of us wanted to write our Namtar spiritual biography, we would talk about factual things of our life. Yes, I was born, then I went to this school. Yes, I had this job. But the mystical aspects of our life would be interwoven with it at the same time, where we'd say, well, you know, at this age, I had this vision. There was a spirit with me my entire life. This spirit used to come to me to work, help me do my job or whatever. And this is just taken in traditional tantric traditions as just being the way reality is. Whereas, of course, from a Western point of view, people might see that there might be something psychologically wrong with you if you lived your life this way or wrote about yourself in that way. But this is to sort of show that, again, the psyche and the symbolism are interwoven within the material world. And again, Tantra focuses on the underlying vitality and energy of our aliveness in the context of subtle influences that shape and motivate the dynamics of our life. So this is where he says we can talk later in the book about sort of one of the main energies of this is, of course, sexual energy. But as he says, sexual energy is only one expression of the subtle forces that flow through us that bring us vitality and creativity. So what Rob Preece says is that this vitality or energy is the root of transformation to wake our full potential. So the tantric path is a way of bringing us back to these being directly in contact with these subtle energies or sort of deep symbols, and that this is the power, the gasoline or the nuclear power that will change us alchemically, that shall be able to bring about sort of deeper spiritual transformation in our lives. Okay, so this tantra, he says, offers us a vehicle for this creative manifestation. Okay, and it's one that's intrinsically connected to the body. But again, the body is a divine body. So why is it connected to the body? Well, the body is the source or the site or the space where these creative energies flow. Okay. Um, yes, looking at this. And then again, he says here that I like the Tibetan word for Tantra, and I've spoken about this before in some of other classes that we've done, is gyu. So Gyu, which means continuity or process of transformation. Of course, so the original meaning, sort of in India, Tantra is thread. And we've spoken about that. There's sort of many different ways of understanding that term continuity or thread. Won't get into it right now because, but we can see when we study classes that the thread of Tantra is the idea of even bridging Sutra and Tantra, bridging using our mind as the bridge, the samsaric world and the divine enlightened world, that bridging our sort of flesh and blood body with our diamond or energy body or divine body, for instance. So thread is sort of the operative metaphor or sort of symbol that we use when we're talking about Tantra. So gyu is the term there. So what he says is that it's basically, we almost on a Jungian point of view, we can understand this thread as being the unfolding of the creative process itself, process of the imagination, process of alchemy, which occurs moment to moment in an act of manifestation and again, transformation. Um, yeah. And then he'll sort of talk about this later on in the book that this process, which unfolds naturally, is actually an expression of something deeper, which is what our Buddha nature is, sort of the source of this sort of energy or sort of a deeper understanding of our mind. Okay, let's just leave it there. Just say what there's four parts of this book I'll just introduce, and then we'll leave a little bit of time for question and answer. Um, So the last little thing he said that I do think is good, he said, Tantra is not a philosophy or a science, but a sort of a collection of creative arts. Its visionary nature is linked with a process that brings deep wisdom into expression like great works of art. The essential principle of Tantra lies in individual, different way, lies in the individual. In different ways, can be, practitioner can be a healer, a shaman, an artist, or an alchemist on this path. So I like to say that that's what that famous practitioner, teacher, and scholar Anne Klein said, is that Tantra is basically like a performance art. I've always argued I don't like when people say Tantra is a science of the mind or a science because, of course, science, as I always say, is intrinsically connected to sort of engineering, mathematics, statistical, reproducible results. Tantra is none of that. Buddhism is none of that. It's not a science in that way. It's a science, if you want to use the Greek term episteme in the sense of a way of knowing, you can say that, but of course, we don't use that word science in that way. So I think it's just like he says, it's an actual using the imagination, using subtle energies. It's a path of transformation, path of artistic manifestation and creativity. So once you become a tantric practitioner, I'm sure most of us know, if you're on it, you end up playing these different roles as sort of one process, but it's almost coming out almost like a rainbow in different colors. Being a healer, being like a shaman in some ways, being an artist, being an alchemist, or sort of a transformer. I think that's great. So, four parts of the book, Rob Preece says just part one is the preliminary conditions for entering the process of Tantra as an alchemical apprenticeship. Part two is elements embarking in the tantric process in the alchemical vessel. What is the nature of this alchemical vessel? Part three, an in-depth actual processes that take place in this vessel, which is sort of our deity practice or deity yoga. And then part four, the completion of the alchemical process and its implications for use as we apply these experiences out in the world and in our personal life. It says tantric principles to encourage the expression of our true Buddha nature through the creative process. Yeah. Then he says, once we're attuned to this creative principle can be present in every aspect of our daily lives. So that's the idea of tantric yoga, or sort of making every moment of our lives sort of a creative, transformative process, or a process of making your life into a work of art. So there was quote that came up on Facebook the other day from me from one of the last interviews. Michel Foucault died before he died in 1984, where he said, gives us a big niche, and make your life a work of art. So he said, find what's beautiful and strong in your life and in society and work from there. Just start pushing that boundary and that space of what's beautiful and what's strong or what's vital. So that's all we're doing with Tantra. Okay, so that's an introduction. There you go. So any comments or questions, concerns, anything to sort of share here before we end? Again, it's just the beginning of the book, but feel free. Mhm. Yes, Christine.
Well, I'm gonna try to thread this together, but
Yeah.
just in the very beginning of your conversation, you were talking about having read this book, I think, in the 90s, and making an observation of how differently our culture looks at spirituality, the big tent of spirituality then and then now. And uh, I wonder if this isn't a piece of how the great divide happens in people, not just in the, well, I think in the West, that we have sort of dualistic views of spirituality and what we call daily reality. And it is the difference between the 90s and now is that maybe part of the divide, and how that's seen and thought about in society or within our cultures. And then at the very end of your your
Mm,
talk today, you talked about Tantra as like a thread,
mm.
bridging thought and spirituality. And so I wonder if you haven't touched on one of our really, what I think of one of our really, really big cultural problems in the 21st century and the potential for um, problem solving there with that thread of Tantra.
Amazing question, like always. Very, very deep. I don't know if we can cover this, and I don't know the answer to this, obviously. But I mean, this is sort of we could have sort of just an hour long conversation, if not longer, just on this one question, Christine. I would think, um, I think this divide in some ways, it's a debate, but I think it's becoming a little bit more healed now. Uh, than it was. Like I mentioned, I mean, but like when I was in university in the early 1990s and studying Tibetan Buddhism, I was just ridiculed by my peers in my philosophy class for being sort of like a superstitious idiot for being into this kind of stuff. I don't think anybody would say that anymore. A lot of scientists now who, there's still a lot of very narrow-minded scientists out there, but we always sort of look at science as being the 1950s guy in the lab coat with the glasses like me and like this. But so many scientists now are doing all sorts of work, like on let's say healing modalities or psychedelics or like years ago if you were sort of like a Timothy Leary, I'm dating myself saying that guy, but like saying that, oh, I'm going to study brain science and ayahuasca. I mean, you'd be in a mental institution like in the 1980s if you tried to do something like that. And now that's just general cultural knowledge. That's completely okay to do that. Even science and technology, people using AI and big computer people to do more spiritual things. Now, then there's a lot of junk science and scientism that comes with this. And I remember my thesis advisor and professor who was so wonderful, but she's like to me like Vajrayogini, but nevertheless, I would sort of argue she could be a little bit narrow-minded at times. But she always said when we were talking about these kinds of issues in the 1990s, she always said, well, anytime empires fall or a system of thought starts coming apart, that's when it gets mystical. So you see, she's a little bit narrow-minded. Like when the Roman Empire starts tilting and crashing, that's when you get late Neoplatonism, where everyone starts believing in spirits and magical powers and whatever. Whereas like early on in sort of the discourse or paradigm, people are a little bit more rational. So she would always say that irrationality is a symptom of decay and decline. I don't think that's the case at all. However, when things open up and you get a lot of creativity, you also get a lot of garbage that comes up as well. The communists always said in revolutions, the scum always floats up to the top, right? Like, in other words, when something comes crashing down a social structure, all the criminal elements and all the wackos come up to the top as well, which, of course, what we're seeing right now in politics. So I think that divide is being healed, which is a good thing. And what was the second aspect of that question, Christina?
Oh, just the referencing Tantra as a thread between the two thoughts. Maybe maybe the observation that you just articulated
Yeah.
has in fact begun to happen, and Tantra perhaps then had a role in that as the
It will.
thread.
I think it is, and I don't think it's because everyone will practice tantric Buddhism. I think tantric Buddhism in a legitimate, sort of authentic way is actually dying in the world. I'd make an argument for that, not to get everybody depressed, but I think tantric Buddhism uh, I actually would argue that what it's done or the influence it's had is a very, very good one. And it's not just Tantric Buddhism. A lot of things are at the forefront of this of healing the divide. And what it is it's not just bringing back the power of spirituality. Most importantly, because Tantra is all based on this, and we'll see this with this book of alchemy and symbolism, it's brought back the importance of the imagination, capital I imagination. The imagination is our most creative part, it's what makes us human. I'm sort of like a British romantic in saying that, Blake and Percy Shelley and everybody else, but that is the key. And as I've always said, tyrannical systems, the first thing they do is destroy the artist and the good inventing scientists because they want to get rid of people's imagination because imagination creates alternatives, different ways of thinking, which any tyrannical system doesn't want you thinking of different ways. They want you thinking only in one way, right? So the imagination is making a comeback. That's the principle of, transformation, alchemy, and spirit, capital S spirit, the imagination. So that's a good thing. So Tantra as thread, Tantra as creativity, Tantra as imagination is what's like Holderling would say, this where in the danger is the saving power as well. Like in the danger of the world, everything falling apart, within it we can find our own imagination that can be the salvation of our civilization or anything else. One of the great philosophers of the 20th century, Edmund Husserl, and please don't read this book because it's too complicated and very boring, but wrote in this amazing book, Crisis of European Understanding. He said, and this is in the 1930s, that you'll have a crisis of the Western civilization falling apart because of this split between the science and the humanities. And what he said is that science has left the imagination behind. People don't understand science anymore. They can't picture what science means. They don't know what quantum mechanics is. They don't know how science works, right? They can't imagine it because it's not taught in school properly. So people don't know science, and the people that go into science get stuck in these little bubbles where they don't even know other parts of science. And then the humanities get split off from that work of the imagination, but it ends up being its own bubble as well, being seen as being irrelevant because it can't produce scientific engineering, practical things. So it ends up becoming sort of a dissociated literary criticism, and that ends up leaving the imagination, normal people behind. So what he was saying, Edmund Husserl, brilliant, he was Jewish and banned from teaching by the Nazi government, and eventually he died. But he said, with the humanities and the sciences being separate and become alienated from normal people, what'll go right up the middle is some kind of primordial religion. And it'll be a religion based on superstition. It won't be a real spirituality, but kind of a form of superstitious idiocy. And that's, I think, came true. What he was saying is, again, because he was arguing against the kind of Nazi mysticism that was taking over Germany at the time, which was racial theory. And if you remember, the Nazis believed in what they call world ice theory, that everything's made out of ice crashing in the universe, and that out of this big block of ice, the Aryan race comes down and they land in Tibet, these aliens, and they're blonde and blue-eyed, and then they're going to take over the world. And I mean, it's completely ridiculous. So what Husserl was saying, how did our German society, which is the height of European civilization, fall into this kind of superstitious idiocy? And it's because science has failed us and the humanities have failed us because we can't educate normal citizens. Like our great cultural achievements can't be brought down to the everyday level of people's understanding. And I think that that's still the case with the scientific divide. So Tantra, if it allows us to bring the imagination in, people's imagination, this can save the world. However, let me end on a negative note. What's destroying the imagination? Let me come out and say it right now. AI people already, they call it AI slop. The internet is just full of garbage music, garbage art, and just garbage ideas because people are letting AI do all the thinking for them, and that's not a good thing. So anyway, that's a little bit of a negative take on this. But however, if we start meditating, we start doing this kind of tantric work with visualization, we rediscover our imagination and our creative power, and that's a good thing.
This is
That
so much fun.
it is so much fun. So encourage that, encourage the arts, encourage people to meditate, to write, to compose, to make music, to dance, do beautiful things in art. And that's what makes us human, not doing algorithms. What artificial intelligence means algorithms. Beings made algorithms. It's great, but humans are more than just algorithms. There we go. Okay, enough of my sort of ranting and I think it's sort of carrying on here. So, how about we? Any other quick question, or can we dedicate what is?
Yes, Matthew, one quick
Yes.
question. What was the title of Robert Beer's book?
Please wait one moment while I go get it. I'll just get it out of my bookshelf here. One sec. Okay, I am making a plug for this book here. I'm glad I found it. Thank you, Marcia, because it's called, I got the title wrong. The Handbook of Tibetan Buddhist Symbols. So here it is right here. This is the soft cover. If you want to spend $100, get the big art book. There's actually more in the big art book than in this book. This book, as you can see, it's thick enough, but it's missing a bunch of stuff. And I was able years ago at Tibet House in New York to see his real paintings that were just fabulous because he, in the traditional way, mixes semi-precious stones and herbs and everything in the paint. So when you see his artwork, I mean, you can get all this stuff online and you Google image it, but the paintings, the Tonkas literally like glow. It's almost like they're neon. So he's an amazing artist, but you can see all the beautiful it's all black and white, unfortunately, but wonderful book. But just all the symbolism here, like 8 auspicious symbols, 5 attributes of sensory enjoyment, animals and mystical creatures. So he'll, like, there's Nagas and stuff. He'll show the symbolism, what they mean in a true Jungian way. They're very Indian or Tibetan symbols from cultures, what is it, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But at the same time, there's something very universal about it. When you read it, you're like, oh yeah, I like this. This is kind of like fairies or something else, and this is relevant to my spiritual life, right? So there you go. Okay, so how about we dedicate here, and then let me just see. I have to, yeah, there it is. I just have to turn off the recording. Let's just take a moment here just to dedicate. Good first class here. So blessings of all holy beings, the truth of karma, and the power of pure spirit intention. May all of our dharma wishes be fulfilled. In particular, may all of our study here of Tantra be put towards healing the world and bringing all sentient beings to awakening. Okay, thank you. I'll just this off here.